What if staying silent made you the strongest person in the room? In a world where bullying, judgment, and pressure push people to their edge, one student flipped the script and changed everything without throwing a single punch. This isn't just another high school story. It's a life lesson you need to hear. Stick around until the end to discover the kind of strength most people never talk about. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let's dive into a journey that just might change how you see power forever. Jalen Carter stepped off the yellow school bus with quiet steps and a heavy heart. This was Brooklyn High, his new school, his final stop before graduation, and hopefully, a fresh start. He had moved from Chicago not because he wanted to, but because life had forced the change. New city, new people, same goal. Stay under the radar, finish senior year in peace, and avoid any trouble along the way. As he tightened the straps of his backpack and looked up at the big brick building in front of him, the sky hung low and gray, like it was mirroring exactly how he felt inside. He didn't expect much from this place. He had been through this routine too many times to count. Show up, get stared at, figure out where to sit at lunch without drawing attention, and hopefully make it through the year without giving anyone a reason to mess with him. That was the plan. Keep his head down, get good grades, graduate, and move on with his life. He wasn't trying to make friends. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just wanted to be invisible. As he walked through the crowded schoolyard, the chatter of students filled the air. Laughs, conversations, shouts across the pavement. Jalen moved slowly, deliberately blending into the flow, hoping to disappear into the crowd. But even though he tried, he felt the eyes. Curious glances. Quick stares. Some subtle, some not so much. It didn't take long for Jalen to notice that he stood out. Not just because he was new, but because he looked different. In a school where nearly everyone else was white, his deep brown skin and focused, watchful eyes made him feel like a spotlight was following him around. It wasn't the first time he had felt this way. The whispers weren't new. The questions that weren't really questions, just comments said loud enough for him to hear, were all too familiar. Who's that? He looks tough. Wonder what school he got kicked out of. Jalen had learned long ago not to react. Not to respond. Not even to let his eyes show emotion. It was better that way. Keep calm, stay quiet, and don't give anyone something they can use against you. When he stepped inside the main hallway, the atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, like a shift in the air. Conversations softened, glances became more pointed, and the crowd seemed to move around him. For a moment, it felt like the hallway was a stage and he was in the spotlight. Jalen felt his stomach tighten, but he didn't stop walking. He didn't make eye contact. He just focused on finding his locker and getting through his first day. But the hallway didn't let him move unnoticed for long. A group of boys stood ahead, walking toward him with too much purpose. One of them, tall, blonde, and sharp-looking, had the kind of presence that made people step aside without being asked. That was Logan Adams. Jalen didn't know his name yet, but something about the way the crowd reacted told him all he needed to know. This was the kind of person who expected control. The kind who didn't like when something, or someone, messed with the way things usually worked. Jalen felt it in his bones. He hadn't even said a word yet, but trouble was already finding him. And in that moment, standing in front of the blue locker that would now be his for the rest of the year, he realized something that made his heart sink a little. No matter how quietly he moved, no matter how little attention he tried to draw, Brooklyn High wasn't going to let him disappear. Logan Adams didn't waste time deciding who the new target would be. From the moment he saw Jalen Carter walk through the hallway with his calm expression and quiet energy, Logan made up his mind. There was something about Jalen that bothered him. Maybe it was how he didn't look nervous, or how he didn't try to impress anyone. Maybe it was the way Jalen didn't seem interested in the power games most kids at Brooklyn High played. Whatever it was, Logan didn't like it. And for someone like him, used to being the center of attention and always in control, that feeling of discomfort was enough to make him act. Logan had been the unofficial ruler of Brooklyn High for years. His confidence, charm, and family name had earned him a strange kind of loyalty, or maybe fear, from most students. Wherever he went, people stepped aside. He never had to ask for anything twice. Backed up by his two closest friends, Trevor and Mason, Logan always had a solid crew with him, ready to back him up and stir things up when needed. Trevor was sharp and always in the know about everyone's business. Mason, more muscle than words, had a cold stare that made people think twice before crossing him. They weren't just his friends, they were part of the system Logan had built, one where he stayed at the top by keeping others below. So when Jalen walked in, silent and unbothered, Logan took it personally. Most new kids either tried too hard to fit in or were visibly anxious, clinging to any chance of acceptance. Jalen did neither. He didn't look scared, just focused, like someone who had seen a lot and knew better than to react too quickly. And that, more than anything, felt like a challenge. Logan couldn't let that slide. He believed that to keep control, you had to set the tone early. And Jalen's cool detachment was throwing off the balance. It started small. A few offhand comments passed between Logan and his friends when Jalen walked by. Whispers that were just loud enough to reach his ears. Sarcastic laughs for no reason. Bumping shoulders in the hallway like it was just an accident. Jalen didn't respond. He kept walking, kept silent. To most people, that silence would be a sign of weakness or fear. But to Logan, it felt different. It felt like defiance. Like Jalen was quietly refusing to play the game. And that made Logan push harder. The subtle stuff soon escalated. Trevor began spreading rumors, small lies that were easy to believe. Maybe Jalen had been kicked out of his last school for fighting. Maybe he had a record. Maybe he was just pretending to be quiet because he was dangerous. The thing about high school is, people don't always need proof, they just need something to whisper about. And before long, the whispers grew. Jalen could feel the stares changing. No longer just curious. Now they were wary. Students gave him more space, looked at him like he was a walking problem. Mason got involved too, making his presence known every time Jalen passed by. A slammed locker door. A shoulder check. A muttered insult. It was never enough to get in real trouble but always enough to provoke. Still, Jalen said nothing. He kept his head down, focused on his classes, and tried to act like it didn't matter. But deep down, it did. He wasn't a robot. He felt every jab, every stare, every unfair assumption. And no matter how calm he stayed on the outside, inside there was a slow, steady burn. Logan mistook Jalen's quiet for fear, but it wasn't. It was control. Hard-earned, battle-tested self-control that Jalen had spent years developing. He had made a promise to himself, and to his father, that he would never let anger take over again. But that promise was getting harder to keep every day. Every time he opened his locker and found something missing. Every time he heard his name whispered behind him. Every time he felt the heat of Logan's gaze from across the hallway, waiting for him to snap. The truth was, Logan didn't just want to mess with Jalen. He wanted to break him. He wanted to see him lose his cool, to crack under the pressure, to react. Because if Jalen reacted, Logan could remind everyone who really ran the school. But Jalen wasn't giving him that satisfaction. And the longer Jalen held his ground, the more obsessed Logan became. It wasn't just about keeping power anymore. It was personal. And for Jalen, it was clear, this wasn't going away. Not until he decided how far he was willing to go to protect his peace. By the end of Jalen's first week at Brooklyn High, it was clear that the bullying wasn't going to fade away on its own. If anything, it was getting worse. What started as small, annoying jabs had now turned into something bigger, more deliberate, more coordinated, and more personal. It wasn't just Logan and his friends anymore. Somehow, the rest of the school had picked up on the message. Jalen Carter was someone to watch, someone to talk about, someone to avoid. The rumors had worked their way through the halls like wildfire, and suddenly, Jalen wasn't just the new kid, he was the kid with a past. Everywhere he went, it felt like someone was whispering behind his back. In the cafeteria, kids moved their trays when he sat down. In class, people gave him side eyes and exchanged smirks when the teacher wasn't looking. He'd hear his name mentioned in low voices, followed by giggles or gasps, depending on which version of the story had been passed around that day. Some said he'd put someone in the hospital at his old school. Others claimed he was kicked out for starting fights with teachers. The details didn't matter, and nobody cared if it was true, they just enjoyed the drama. Trevor played his part well. He was always the one whispering just a little louder than necessary, just enough for Jalen to hear bits and pieces. Mason added the muscle, making sure Jalen never walked a hallway without feeling tension in the air. One day, Jalen opened his locker to find all of his textbooks gone. In their place was a crumpled note that read like a cruel joke, telling him to go back to Chicago. He stood there in silence, staring at the empty space where his books should have been, the note clutched in his hand. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. But something inside him cracked, just a little. The worst part wasn't the pranks or the lies. It was the feeling of being completely alone. There wasn't a single face in the crowd that looked like it might offer a smile or a friendly gesture. The more Jalen ignored the hate, the more isolated he became. The students weren't just watching anymore, they were participating, even if it was passive. A few laughs here. A sarcastic comment there. Nobody stood up for him. Nobody asked if he was okay. And Jalen, for all his strength and discipline, started to wonder how much longer he could keep swallowing it all. He remembered what had happened in Chicago. How the bullying back then had turned physical. How he tried to stay calm until one day, he couldn't. That moment haunted him every night. He had promised himself it would never happen again. But here he was, living through another version of the same story, just with different names and faces. One afternoon in the cafeteria, things reached a new low. Jalen had barely taken a bite of his lunch when Logan came strutting in with his usual smug expression, flanked by Trevor and Mason. They made their way over, loud enough to attract attention but subtle enough to claim it was innocent. Logan accidentally knocked over Jalen's tray, spilling juice and food across the table. The room went quiet, every eye turned toward them. Phones were pulled out. A few students even looked excited, like they were waiting for Jalen to explode. But he didn't. He picked up the tray, walked to the trash can, and cleaned the mess without saying a word. The silence that followed felt heavy. No one laughed. No one cheered. For a second, even Logan seemed thrown off. Jalen's calm response didn't fit the script. He wasn't playing the role of the angry new kid. He wasn't giving anyone what they wanted. Yet that control came at a cost. After the cafeteria incident, the tension followed Jalen like a shadow. He started to feel the weight of it physically. Tired eyes, tight shoulders, restless nights. Even though he was doing everything right, even though he refused to react, it still felt like he was losing something. Like each day chipped away a little more of his energy, his patience, his hope. What made it worse was knowing that none of this was random. Logan wasn't just being cruel for fun. He had a purpose. He was trying to push Jalen to the edge, to make him crack in front of everyone. Jalen could feel it. And as much as he wanted to keep walking past the whispers and stares, he couldn't shake the growing sense that something had to change soon. Because no matter how calm he stayed, he was starting to reach his limit. At home, Jalen Carter did everything he could to act like things were fine. He walked in quietly, set down his backpack, and gave a half-smile if his dad happened to be in the kitchen. He ate dinner, kept the conversation light, and disappeared into his room as soon as he could. Once he closed that door behind him, though, the silence hit different. It wasn't peace, it was pressure. The kind that crept in through the walls and sat heavy on his chest. Lately, his nights were getting harder. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. He'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, hearing every tick of the old wall clock across the room. Most nights, he'd replay the day at school over and over in his head, trying to figure out what he could have done differently. But the truth was, he hadn't done anything wrong. And maybe that's what bothered him the most. No matter how respectful, quiet, or calm he tried to be, someone still found a reason to push him, to label him, to try and break him down. Jalen knew what Logan was doing. He recognized the signs because he'd been through this before. Back in Chicago, it had started the same way. Same stares, same whispers, same cruel tricks. There was a kid named Tyler who had made it his mission to make Jalen's life hell. At first, Jalen stayed quiet. He had tried to be the bigger person, let things slide, do what adults always said, to ignore it. But day after day, Tyler pushed him. It wasn't just words. It got physical. Blocking his path, shoving him in the hallway, throwing out racial slurs like it was a joke. Jalen had held it in for weeks. He kept telling himself he could take it, that it would stop. Until one day it didn't. The day everything changed was cold and gray, kind of like his first morning at Brooklyn High. Jalen had just finished school and was heading home when Tyler and his group caught him outside. They laughed, spit insults, and Tyler got too close. Way too close. Jalen remembered trying to walk away, to keep his promise to his dad to stay calm, but then Tyler said something that cut too deep. Jalen snapped. It wasn't a punch. It was rage. All the pain, the frustration, the shame, everything came pouring out in that one moment. He didn't even realize what he was doing until Tyler was on the ground, bleeding, and people were screaming. That day changed everything. Jalen got suspended. Tyler ended up in the hospital. The school turned on Jalen like he was the villain, even though he'd been the one pushed too far. His family was dragged into it. They were blamed, judged, and treated like the problem. His dad tried to stay strong, but Jalen saw the pain in his eyes. They eventually left Chicago, hoping to start over somewhere new. That's how they ended up in Brooklyn. Now, months later, Jalen could still feel the weight of that moment. He didn't just carry it in his memory, he carried it in his body. In the way he walked a little slower past groups of people. In the way he stayed quiet even when everything inside him was screaming. In the way he clenched his fists under the desk when the lies and jokes got too loud. He had made a promise to himself after Chicago. He would never let anger take the lead again. No matter what. But Logan was pushing him. Every stare, every rumor, every small act of cruelty. It was all chipping away at the self-control Jalen worked so hard to build. Some days were better than others. He'd walk home in the quiet, listen to music, remind himself why he needed to keep his cool. But some nights, he'd lie in bed and feel that old heat rising in his chest, that fear that one day, if it kept building, he might lose control again. And that scared him more than anything. Because Jalen didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't want to be the kid who snapped, who people feared, who got labeled as violent just because he defended himself. He wanted to be someone his dad could be proud of. Someone who stayed strong without breaking others in the process. But deep down, Jalen knew something had to give. Either Logan would stop, or something inside him would. And he didn't know which one would happen first. The challenge didn't come as a surprise. It was more like the final piece of a puzzle Jalen had been watching fall into place for weeks. On an ordinary morning, walking through the crowded hallway like he always did, trying to ignore the stares and whispers, Jalen spotted a sheet of paper taped to his locker. At first, he thought it was just another childish prank. But as he got closer, he read the bold, rushed handwriting, and it stopped him cold. Logan Adams had called him out. Not with words or a rumor this time, but with a public challenge for everyone to see. After school. At the sports field. The message was clear and intentional. Jalen was being set up to fail, either by not showing up and looking weak or by showing up and being pushed into something worse. The laughter in the hallway picked up immediately. Students passed by, nudging each other, whispering with excitement like this was the big event they'd been waiting for. Phones were already out. The news was spreading like wildfire, and Jalen knew exactly what Logan was doing. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. Logan wanted to humiliate him in front of the entire school. He wanted to trap Jalen into a corner where every move would be seen and judged. Jalen stared at the note a little longer, then quietly peeled it off and put it in his pocket. He didn't say a word. He just stood still, letting the noise around him fade into the background as he thought through what had to come next. Across the hallway, Logan was standing with his usual crew, Trevor and Mason nearby, watching Jalen like they were already celebrating. Logan wore that same smug expression, the kind that said he thought he'd already won. He was so sure Jalen wouldn't show. Or if he did, he was sure he could embarrass him enough to seal his place at the top once and for all. Jalen didn't return the stare. He didn't give Logan any reaction. Instead, he turned and walked to class like nothing had happened, but inside, something had changed. He was done staying silent. That night at home, Jalen sat with the note in his hands. He thought about every moment that had led to this. The constant whispers, the missing textbooks, the cafeteria incident, the fake stories, the isolation. And now this. A public showdown he never asked for, with people who had no idea who he really was. He remembered what his dad had told him, not about fighting, but about strength. About how real power meant keeping your composure even when everything in you wanted to snap. Jalen knew the easy thing would be to walk away, to ignore the challenge and let people say what they wanted. But he also knew that if he kept letting Logan call the shots, nothing would ever change. The next day, just before lunch, Jalen did something no one expected. He walked straight through the hallway, calm as ever, and approached Logan and his crew. The students nearby went quiet almost instantly. Everyone turned, eyes wide, ears straining to catch every word. Jalen didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. But what he said was loud enough for everyone to hear. He'd be there. He wasn't going to run. And whatever Logan thought he was proving, Jalen was ready to face it head-on. There was a shift in the hallway right then. Not loud, but real. The crowd didn't laugh. Some students actually looked surprised. Even Logan didn't speak right away. That same confidence was still on his face, but something behind his eyes flickered, like the certainty he always had was suddenly a little shaky. Jalen turned and walked away without another word, and the hallway stayed quiet long after he was gone. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. Jalen could feel the eyes on him in every class, in the cafeteria, even in the bathroom. Students whispered as he passed, wondering if he'd really show up, if there would be a fight, if Logan would finally break him. But Jalen didn't care about any of that. He wasn't going to fight because he was angry. He wasn't going to hurt anyone just to prove something. He was going because he needed to stand up for himself. Not to win a crowd, but to remind himself who he was. Strong. And in control. That afternoon, the air around the school felt different. It wasn't just another end to a long day. It was the calm before something big. Word had spread quickly, and the sports field behind Brooklyn High had become the quiet center of everyone's curiosity. Students lingered nearby, pretending to wait for rides or hang out, but really they were just there to see what would happen between Jalen Carter and Logan Adams. It was the kind of tension that didn't need loud voices. Everyone felt it like static in the air. Logan was already there, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed and that same smirk on his face. He had backup, of course. Trevor, Mason, and two new faces today. His older brother Blake and a wiry kid named Derek. Blake was tall, broad, and clearly used to getting respect without saying much. Derek had that twitchy energy, always shifting around like he was ready to cause trouble just for the fun of it. Together, they stood like a wall, waiting for Jalen to show up, fully expecting to scare him off or corner him into reacting badly. Jalen walked down the path toward the field at a steady pace, his shoulders relaxed, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie. He didn't rush. He didn't pause. And he didn't bring anyone with him. Just him, alone. But something about the way he carried himself said more than a whole group could. He wasn't afraid. And more importantly, he wasn't there to impress anyone. That alone was enough to make Logan shift a little, just slightly, like something wasn't going quite the way he planned. When Jalen reached the edge of the field, he stopped a few feet away from them and looked directly at Logan. His voice was calm, even. He asked what Logan wanted, knowing full well what this was about. Logan gave a little speech, something about territory and respect, but Jalen didn't respond. He just listened. When Logan nodded toward Blake and Derek, the setup was clear. It wasn't going to be a fair confrontation. They were going to try to make an example out of Jalen, and they thought they'd already won just by showing up with more bodies. But they didn't know Jalen. The moment Blake stepped forward and reached for Jalen, it was over before it started. Jalen's reflexes were fast, clean, efficient, controlled. He shifted to the side, caught Blake's wrist, and turned his weight just enough to throw him off balance. Blake went down hard, not hurt badly, but definitely surprised. It happened so quickly that even Logan seemed stunned. Before Derek could jump in from behind, Jalen was already moving. He spun, dodged, and had Derek's arm locked in a way that was firm but careful. No intention to injure, just to show control. Derek tried to break free but couldn't. Jalen let go at the right moment, sending him stumbling away without harm, but definitely with his pride bruised. Logan's mouth opened, but no words came out. What he'd expected was for Jalen to hesitate, to back down, maybe to throw a wild punch and lose control. But Jalen didn't hesitate. He wasn't wild. He was calm, sharp, and completely in charge of himself. It was strength that didn't need to shout. And that was the part that shook Logan the most. Then came the final blow. Not a punch, but a moment. Logan, feeling the pressure and losing grip on the situation, charged. His anger finally caught up with him, and he rushed Jalen, shouting, fists clenched. But again, Jalen was ready. He moved with precision, stepping aside and gently catching Logan's arm mid-swing. In one smooth motion, he twisted and pinned it behind Logan's back, holding him steady but not hurting him. Logan squirmed, frustrated and humiliated, but he couldn't move. He was stuck. Jalen leaned in, not angrily, just speaking quietly so only Logan could hear. He reminded him that he didn't come here to fight, but he wasn't going to let himself be bullied either. Then, just as quickly, he let go. Logan stumbled forward, breathless, caught in the reality that he'd been beaten not by brute force, but by someone who never wanted to fight in the first place. Jalen didn't stick around for applause. He didn't pose or brag. He simply stood there for a moment, met Logan's eyes one last time, then turned and walked away from the field. And in that silence, it became clear to everyone watching. Jalen's strength wasn't in how hard he could hit, but in how well he could control himself when it mattered most. The next day at Brooklyn High felt like the start of something new. The energy in the halls had shifted, even if no one was saying it out loud. People still walked in groups, talked between classes, and shuffled through their routines, but there was an invisible current running underneath it all. Whispers were different now. The usual teasing and rumors were replaced by quiet looks and low conversations about what had happened behind the school. The day before, Jalen Carter hadn't just shown up to Logan Adams' challenge. He had flipped the script entirely, and everyone knew it. Logan didn't show up to school that morning until second period. When he did, he walked alone. No Trevor. No Mason. Blake and Derek were nowhere to be seen. And most noticeably, no one rushed to greet him or step aside as he passed. For the first time in a long while, Logan didn't get the same attention that had followed him like a spotlight. He looked different too, not bruised or hurt physically, but quieter. There was no smirk, no swagger, just a heavy look in his eyes that said more than he probably wanted to admit. Jalen, on the other hand, stayed the same. He walked in, calm as always, not smiling, not gloating, just moving through the halls like any other student. That was what struck people the most. He hadn't changed after what happened. No celebration, no retelling of the story to boost his image. He didn't need to. Everyone else was already talking about it. But he didn't join in. He just went to class, ate his lunch, and kept his head level. And that quiet consistency said something loud. What Jalen did on that field wasn't just about winning a confrontation. It wasn't about knocking anyone down or proving he was tougher. It was about showing that real strength looked different than what most people were used to. He hadn't thrown a single punch in anger. He hadn't yelled. He didn't even try to embarrass anyone. He had defended himself, stayed in control, and walked away without feeding the drama. For a school that had run on fear and posturing for so long, it was like someone had cracked open a window and let in a breeze of something honest. Students who once laughed at Logan's jokes now second-guessed joining in. A few even started nodding at Jalen in the halls. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. The same kids who had avoided him before were now a little more open, more curious. Not because he scared them, but because they respected what they saw. They saw someone who could stand alone, hold his ground, and still treat people with dignity. That kind of presence didn't need words to earn respect. Even the teachers started to notice. The tension that had once clouded the classroom when Jalen entered had begun to fade. Some teachers who had once watched him closely with quiet caution were now seeing him for who he really was. A disciplined, thoughtful kid who had learned hard lessons and carried himself with quiet confidence. They noticed how other students were watching him too, not with fear, but with a new kind of awareness. It was like the atmosphere in the building had lightened just a bit. As for Logan, The cracks in his image only deepened. Without the power he once had, his presence started to shrink. He wasn't avoided out of fear anymore, he was just ignored. The silence that used to follow his footsteps had turned into indifference. The group that once propped him up scattered. Trevor stopped showing up by his side. Mason stopped defending him. Blake kept his distance. It wasn't dramatic, just gradual and obvious. Logan had ruled through control, and now that control was gone, so was the loyalty. Jalen never rubbed it in. He didn't speak about Logan. He didn't tell his side of the story or try to gain popularity from the moment. And that's exactly why people respected him more. In a place where status often came from how loud or flashy someone could be, Jalen stood out by doing the opposite. His power came from staying grounded. The students at Brooklyn High didn't all change overnight, but the ripple effect had started. A few more people began standing up for themselves. A few fewer joined in when someone was being mocked. Something real had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't fully explain it. Jalen had walked in as the quiet new kid, but now he was something else entirely. A reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just stands steady and refuses to be moved. In the weeks that followed, Brooklyn High started to feel like a different place. It wasn't perfect, and not every student had changed, but something deeper had shifted. There was less tension in the halls. Fewer stares that carried judgment. More students spoke to one another with a little more kindness, like they were beginning to understand that respect wasn't something you forced, it was something you earned by how you carried yourself. And at the center of that quiet change was Jalen Carter. Jalen never asked for attention, and he definitely didn't seek out admiration. But people noticed him now, not out of fear or curiosity, but out of genuine respect. They saw the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he helped someone pick up their books in the hallway without needing recognition, the way he showed up every day just trying to do the right thing. That kind of steady presence didn't fade. It grew. What surprised most people even more than Jalen's strength was how he handled everything after the confrontation with Logan. He never gloated. He didn't spread stories or make jokes at Logan's expense. When people tried to get him to talk about it, he just brushed it off. He didn't need to relive it. For him, it wasn't a victory. It was something he had to do to protect himself and hold on to the person he'd worked hard to become. And that quiet grace earned him more respect than any dramatic moment ever could. Meanwhile, Logan had to face the consequences of his own choices. The weight of his downfall hit hard. The power he once held disappeared almost overnight. The friends who used to hang on his every word stopped showing up. The attention he was used to turned cold. In the cafeteria, he sat alone. In class, he kept his head down. And in the hallways, he walked quietly, no longer the center of everything. It was painful, and it was humbling. But strangely enough, that space, where everything he once built had fallen away, became the place where something new could begin. At first, Logan didn't know what to do with the silence. He hated the stares, the awkward distance people kept from him. But after a while, he started listening. Really listening. To himself. To what he'd done. To who he'd become. He realized how much he'd used power to cover up fear, how often he hurt others to protect his own ego. And in that quiet, he found something unexpected, the desire to be better. The first time Logan approached Jalen, it was simple. No grand apology. No speech. Just a few honest words. He admitted he had been wrong, really wrong, and that he was trying to make things right, even if it would take time. Jalen didn't say much, just nodded, but that small gesture meant everything. It was a start. And sometimes, a start is all someone needs. From that point on, Logan changed little by little. He didn't try to get back his old image, and he didn't try to act like nothing had happened. Instead, he chose to stay quiet, help where he could, and earn back trust through actions, not words. People noticed, and while some were slow to accept it, others began to see the shift. Logan was no longer trying to lead through fear, he was trying to live with honesty. It wasn't about redemption for anyone else. It was about learning how to live with himself in a way that felt real. Jalen, too, continued his path with the same calm presence. He still walked alone sometimes, but it no longer felt lonely. The respect people had for him wasn't loud or forced. It was quiet, steady, and real. He had become something more than a student or a survivor. He had become a symbol of what real strength looked like in a world that often got it wrong. Brooklyn High wasn't perfect, but it had grown. And so had the people inside it. What started as a battle between two students became a story of growth, humility, and change. Jalen didn't set out to change the school. He only wanted peace. But in standing up for himself, with restraint and dignity, he taught everyone around him that true power isn't about control, it's about character. And in the end, that was the real victory. The story of Jalen Carter at Brooklyn High offers powerful life lessons that go far beyond the walls of a school. It reminds us that real strength isn't found in dominance or intimidation, but in the ability to stay grounded, patient, and in control, even when life pushes us to our limits. Jalen's journey shows that the way we respond to adversity can either break us or become the foundation for something stronger. Choosing dignity over rage, wisdom over impulse, and empathy over revenge takes courage, especially in a world where quick anger is often mistaken for power. Logan's fall, and eventual growth, teaches us that it's never too late to change, to reflect, and to rebuild ourselves on better values. Respect earned through compassion, self-discipline, and integrity is far more lasting than any authority gained through fear. In real life, we all face moments where we're tested. At work, in relationships, in our communities. How we respond defines the kind of people we are. So ask yourself, when pressure rises, can you hold your ground with grace? If this message spoke to you, let us know in the comments what kind of stories or topics you'd like to see next. We're here to bring you meaningful, inspiring content that you can carry into your own life. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that matters.